The crystalline echoes hummed with anticipation as news spread through the 12 racial castes of the empire. The Heart's Weave, the ancient ritual show that determined the fate of magical bloodlines, was returning after 7 years of absence. In the shadowed corners of the lower markets, where exiled Omegas scraped together survival from scraps and whispered promises, one particular summons would change everything. Kalen stared at the ornate scroll, its golden threads weaving themselves into readable text as his fingers traced the edges. The Temple of Solar Weaving had not forgotten him, it seemed. 7 years of exile, 7 years of pretending his heart had died with his faith, and now they wanted him back for their grand spectacle. "You have to accept," Jorik, his merchant guardian, insisted from across the cramped room above the potion shop. The older man's weathered hands gestured frantically at the scroll. "This is your chance, boy. Your chance to reclaim your name, your bloodline, your future." Kalen's emerald eyes remained fixed on the parchment, but his mind wandered to memories he'd buried deep. The Temple of Solar Weaving had been his home once, before the war, before the betrayal, before everything had turned to ash. He'd been a faithful student then, believing in prophetic love and destined bonds, trusting that the universe would guide him to his perfect match. How naive he'd been. "They'll pair me with someone," Kalen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 7 years' worth of carefully constructed emotional walls. "Someone who'll pretend to love me for the cameras, for the crystal echoes, for the entertainment of the masses." "And you'll pretend back," Jorik replied pragmatically. "That's the game, Kalen. You play it well enough, and maybe you'll find something real in the pretense." The irony wasn't lost on him. An Omega from the exile caste, forced to perform love for the entertainment of those who'd cast him out. But the alternative was remaining in the shadows forever, watching his life slip away one gray day at a time. 3 days later, Kalen stood before the towering gates of the Heart's Weave compound, his few possessions in a worn leather satchel. The architecture was as magnificent as he remembered: crystal spires that caught and refracted light into rainbow patterns, floating gardens that defied gravity, and everywhere the hum of ancient magic that made his Omega senses tingle with recognition. The living chronicles, those mysterious mages who prophesied fate and recorded destiny, had already begun their preparations. Kalen could sense their presence like whispers at the edge of consciousness, their magic probing and cataloging every participant who entered the compound. "Kalen of the Solar Weave," a voice called out, and he turned to see a figure approaching him across the courtyard. For a moment, his heart stopped entirely. 7 years had changed Mirinos, but not in ways that mattered. He was still tall and lean, with the predatory grace that marked demons of the higher castes. His silver hair fell in waves to his shoulders, and his eyes remained that impossible shade of violet that had once haunted Kalen's dreams. But there was something different now, a coldness that hadn't been there before, a carefully constructed mask that hid whatever lay beneath. "Mirinos," Kalen managed, proud that his voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening in his chest. "I wasn't expecting to see you here. The Shadow Court deemed it appropriate," Mirinos replied, his tone perfectly neutral. "We are to be partners in this ritual. The Living Chronicles have already confirmed our compatibility." The word compatibility hit Kalen like a physical blow. Once they'd been more than compatible. Once they'd been everything to each other. But that was before Mirinos had disappeared in the night, leaving Kalen to face the temple's judgment alone. "How convenient," Kalen said, allowing just a hint of his old sarcasm to color his words. "The universe has a sense of humor, it seems." Something flickered in Marinos's eyes: pain, perhaps, or regret. But it was gone so quickly that Kalen almost thought he'd imagined it. "We should discuss our strategy," Mirinos said, falling into step beside Kalen as they walked toward the residential quarter. "The Heart's Weave has evolved since the last time. The audience expects more now. More emotion, more passion, more believable love. And you think we can provide that?" Kalen asked, stopping abruptly and turning to face his former lover. "After everything that happened between us?" For a moment, Marinos's mask slipped entirely, and Kalen saw the raw pain beneath. I think we can provide the illusion of it, he said softly. Isn't that what we're both here for? To pretend. Before Kalen could respond, a new voice cut through the tension between them. Forgive the interruption, but are you two the partners everyone's been talking about? They turned to see a third figure approaching, a werewolf by the scent and bearing, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of presence that spoke of hard-won battles and deep losses. His hair was dark brown with silver streaks at the temples, and his eyes held the golden hue that marked him as a wolf of the wild privilege. Real of the wild privilege, the newcomer introduced himself, extending a hand first to Mirinos, then to Kalen. I'm here as part of the expanded format. The Living Chronicles want to explore the possibility of alternative arrangements. Kalen's Omega senses immediately picked up on the undercurrents in Real's scent: loneliness, honor, and underneath it all, a profound sadness that resonated with his own hidden pain. There was something else too, something that made his magic stir in recognition. Alternative arrangements? Mir Enos asked, his voice sharpening with suspicion. Triangle bonds, Real explained, his manner straightforward and honest. The Chronicles believe that some destinies involve more than two souls. They want to test whether the three of us might form something unprecedented. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Kalen found himself studying both men: Mirinos, who represented his past and all the pain that came with it, and Real, who was an unknown quantity but whose presence seemed to calm the constant anxiety that had plagued him for years. The audience will love it, Mirinos said finally, his cynicism evident. 3 men, 3 different casts, 3 different kinds of love. It's exactly the kind of spectacle they're hoping for. Maybe, Real said, his golden eyes meeting Kalen's directly. But maybe it's also exactly what we need. That night, as Kalen lay in his assigned quarters staring at the ceiling, he found himself thinking about the cruel irony of his situation. He was here to perform love for the entertainment of the masses, paired with the man who'd broken his heart and a stranger who seemed to understand him better than anyone had in years. The blood spell still burned in his veins, the one he'd cast in fury and heartbreak 7 years ago, binding his life force to Mir Enos in ways that neither time nor distance had been able to break. He'd never told anyone about it, never sought to have it removed. It was his secret torment, the constant reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd never be able to fully let go. But now, with Real's presence added to the mix, something was changing. The rigid structure of the spell was beginning to shift to accommodate this new possibility. For the first time in 7 years, Kalen felt something other than resignation about his future. Chapter 2: False Love Before Living Eyes. The first ceremony began at dawn, when the crystal echoes were most receptive to emotional resonance. Kalen stood in the center of the ritual circle, his hands bound with silver cord to Marinos's, while Real stood at the triangle's third point, his own hands free but his presence anchoring the magic between them. The Living Chronicles watched from their elevated platform, their faces hidden behind masks of polished obsidian. Kalen could feel their magic probing at the edges of his consciousness, reading the emotions that flowed between the 3 men like currents in a river. The binding of hands, the lead chronicle announced, his voice carrying across the compound and into the crystal echoes that would transmit this moment to viewing chambers across the empire. The first test of compatibility, where truth cannot be hidden and false emotion cannot be sustained. Kalen's hands trembled slightly as the silver cord tightened around his wrists. The metal was enchanted to respond to the emotional state of those it bound. It would grow warm with genuine feeling, cold with deception, and burn with hatred or fear. The moment the binding was complete, Kalen gasped. The connection between him and Mir Enos, dulled by years of separation and emotional walls, blazed to life with an intensity that nearly brought him to his knees. But it wasn't just the old bond. Real's presence added a new dimension, a stabilizing force that kept the connection from overwhelming him entirely. I can feel everything, Mir Enos whispered, his violet eyes wide with shock. Your pain, your anger, your... Don't, Kalen warned, but it was too late. The silver cord was already warming against their skin, responding to the complex mixture of love, hurt, and desperate longing that flowed between them. Real stepped closer, his own magic reaching out to touch theirs. "Let me help," he said softly, and suddenly the overwhelming emotions began to sort themselves into something manageable. The werewolf's presence was like a filter, allowing the love to flow while containing the more destructive feelings. The crowd watching from the viewing platforms murmured with appreciation. This was exactly what they'd come to see: real emotion, real connection, real drama unfolding before their eyes. The second test, the Chronicle announced. The brewing of the passion elixir, where partners must work in harmony to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The binding cords dissolved, but the connection between them remained strong. Kalen found himself working alongside Mir Enos at the ceremonial cauldron, their movements falling into the familiar rhythm they'd once shared. Real gathered ingredients, his wolf senses guiding him to the perfect herbs and minerals. "Like this?" Real asked, holding up a sprig of silver-leafed moonwort. "Perfect," Kalen said, and their fingers brushed as he took the herb. The contact sent a shock of recognition through both of them. Not the desperate, complicated love he felt for Mir Enos, but something gentler and potentially deeper. As they worked, Kalen became aware of how naturally the three of them fit together. Marinos's precise demon magic, his own intuitive Omega abilities, and Real's grounding wolf strength created a perfect balance. The passion elixir they produced was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not the usual purple or red, but a shifting rainbow of colors that seemed to contain all emotions at once. "Unprecedented," one of the chronicles murmured, and Kalen could hear the excitement in his voice. "The resonance readings are off the charts." That evening, as they shared a meal in the common area, Kalen found himself caught between his past and his potential future. Mir Enos sat across from him, his expression carefully neutral, while Real occupied the chair to his right, his presence both comforting and unsettling in its unfamiliarity. "You're different," Mir Enos said suddenly, his violet eyes studying Kalen with the intensity that had once made him feel like the most important person in the world. "Stronger, more contained." "7 years of exile will do that to a person," Kalen replied, not bothering to hide the bitterness in his voice. "You learn to rely on yourself when everyone else disappears." "I didn't disappear," Mir Enos said quietly. "I was." "You were what?" Kalen demanded, his carefully constructed walls cracking slightly. "You were protecting me? You were saving me? You were doing what was best for both of us." Real's hand settled on Kalen's shoulder, a gentle weight that somehow managed to calm the storm building inside him. "Maybe this isn't the time," the werewolf said diplomatically. "The chronicles are still monitoring our emotional states. Whatever happened between you two, it's affecting the readings." Kalen took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain control. Real was right, they were being watched, analyzed, judged. His personal drama with Mir Enos could wait. "Tell me about your pack," he said to Real, deliberately changing the subject. "The Wild Privilege is known for their warrior traditions, isn't it?" Something dark flickered across Real's face. "Was known for them," he corrected. "My pack was destroyed in the magical hunts 3 years ago. I'm the last of my bloodline." The simple statement carried such weight of grief that Kalen felt his Omega instincts responding, wanting to comfort and protect the strong man who'd lost everything. Without thinking, he reached out and covered Real's hand with his own. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know what it's like to lose everything you thought was permanent." Real turned his hand palm up, threading their fingers together. "Maybe that's why we recognize each other," he said. "We've both learned that the only thing you can truly count on is yourself." Across the table, Mir Enos watched this exchange with an expression that might have been longing or might have been regret. "And yet here we are," he said softly, "trying to create something new from the ashes of what we've lost." Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The Chamber of Confession was a place Kalen had hoped never to see again. The walls were lined with truth-light crystals that responded to deception by flaring with uncomfortable brightness. It was here that the Heartsweave participants were required to reveal their deepest secrets, their most private fears, their most carefully guarded truths. I should go first, Mirino said, his usual composure cracking slightly as he looked at the confession chair. There are things you need to know, things that might change how you see our situation. Kalen settled into the observer's seat, while Real took his place at the emotional anchor point. The triangle configuration had become natural to them over the past few days, each man instinctively taking his position in their unique dynamic. Begin whenever you're ready, the Chronicle's voice echoed through the chamber, though the speaker remained invisible behind the chamber's magical barriers. Mir Enos closed his eyes, his hands gripping the arms of the confession chair. 7 years ago, I was heir to the Shadow Court and deeply in love with an Omega student from the Solar Weave Temple. We made promises to each other, pledges that I believed were stronger than any magical binding. The truth light crystals remained steady, confirming the honesty of his words. Kalen felt his heart clench as memories of those promises came flooding back, whispered words in dark corners, plans for a future that seemed impossible but worth fighting for. When the war came, Mir Enos continued. My court was blamed for the curse that destroyed the northern lands. The evidence was circumstantial, but the political pressure was enormous. I was given a choice: renounce my connection to the Solar Weave Temple and everything associated with it, or face execution for treason. The crystals flared slightly, indicating that he was withholding something. Marinos's jaw tightened, and he forced himself to continue. I chose to run. I told myself it was to protect him, to keep him safe from the political fallout. But the truth is, I was a coward. I was scared of what choosing love over duty would cost me. Now the crystals blazed with the light of absolute truth, and Kalen felt something inside his chest crack open. All these years, he'd believed that Mir Enos had simply stopped loving him, that he'd been abandoned for someone or something better. The reality was somehow both better and worse. There's more, Mir Enos said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The night I left, I cast a tracking spell. I wanted to be able to find him again, to make sure he was safe. But when I tried to activate it 3 days later, I discovered that he'd cast something too. A blood binding, tied to his life force. Kalen went cold. He'd never told anyone about the spell he'd cast in his fury and heartbreak, the magic that had bound his life to Marinos's in ways that neither time nor distance could break. For 7 years, Mir Enos continued, I felt every moment of his pain, his loneliness, his despair. I felt him struggling to survive in exile, felt him forcing himself to believe that what we had wasn't real. And I've been powerless to do anything about it because I was too much of a coward to face what I'd done. The confession chair released him, and Mir Enos slumped forward, emotionally drained. Kalen sat frozen, processing the revelation that his most closely guarded secret had been shared all along. Your turn, Real said gently, his hand warm on Kalen's shoulder. The chamber requires balance. His truth for yours. Kalen moved to the confession chair on unsteady legs. The seat was still warm from Marinos's presence, and he could smell the lingering scent of demon magic and emotional exhaustion. I cast the blood binding the night he left, Kalen said without preamble, his voice stronger than he'd expected. I was 17, heartbroken, and furious. I wanted him to suffer the way I was suffering. I wanted him to carry a piece of my pain with him wherever he went. The truth light crystals pulsed with gentle acceptance. Unlike Marinos's more complex revelations, this one was straightforward in its honesty. But it wasn't just revenge, Kalen continued, his emerald eyes finding Marinos's violet ones across the chamber. It was love, twisted, desperate love that couldn't let go. I bound us together because I couldn't bear the thought of him being completely free of me. And now, the Chronicle's voice prompted. Kalen took a shuddering breath. Now I realize that love isn't about binding someone to you against their will. It's about choosing each other freely, every day, despite the risks and difficulties. I've learned that from watching Real, from seeing how he honors his lost pack while remaining open to new connections. The crystals flared with warm light, and Kalen felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The binding is still active, he said, looking directly at Mir Enos. I don't know how to break it, and I'm not sure I want to. But I need you to know that if you want freedom from it, from me, I'll find a way." Myrrhinos was out of his chair and across the chamber before Kalen could take another breath. His hands framed Kalen's face, his touch gentle but desperate. "I don't want freedom from you," he whispered. "I want freedom to choose you. There's a difference." The kiss that followed was 7 years in the making, desperate, hungry, and full of all the words they'd never been able to say. Kalen melted into it, his hands fisting in Myrrhinos' silver hair, his omega senses singing with recognition and relief. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Across the chamber, Real watched with an expression that was part longing, part sorrow. "I'm sorry," Kalen said, turning to the werewolf. "I didn't mean to exclude you. This situation is complicated, and I don't want you to feel like you're just an observer in your own life." Real smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Love is complicated," he agreed, "but it's also big enough to encompass more than most people realize. I'm not asking you to choose between your past and your future, Kalen. I'm asking you to consider whether you might have room for both." That night, Kalen found himself unable to sleep. The revelations in the Chamber of Confession had shifted something fundamental in his understanding of the past 7 years. He'd been carrying guilt and anger over choices that had been made out of fear and desperation, not malice or indifference. He slipped out of his quarters and made his way to the garden, where the moonlight filtered through the crystal formations and created patterns of light and shadow on the ground. He wasn't surprised to find Mir Enos there, sitting on a bench beneath a flowering tree. "Couldn't sleep either?" Kalen asked, settling beside him. "Too many thoughts," Mir Enos admitted. "Too many regrets and what-ifs." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own reflections. Finally, Mir Enos spoke again. "I brought something back," he said quietly. "From the Shadow Court. A relic that might be able to break the blood binding, if that's what you want." Kalen turned to study his profile in the moonlight. "What would it cost?" "My demon abilities," Mir Enos said simply. "The ritual would drain them entirely. I'd become fully mortal, just another exile with no special powers or political connections." The sacrifice inherent in the offer took Kalen's breath away. "You would do that? Give up everything that makes you who you are?" "I'd do it to prove that I'm not the coward I was 7 years ago," Mir Enos replied. "I'd do it to show you that you're worth more to me than power or position or magical abilities. And if I asked you not to? If I said that the binding doesn't feel like a prison anymore, but like a connection worth preserving?" Mir Enos turned to face him fully, hope and vulnerability warring in his violet eyes. "Then I'd say that maybe we've both learned something about what love really means." Chapter 4: Magic, Attraction, and Fear. The overload began during the night of the 4th ritual, when the passion artifact's effects proved stronger than anyone had anticipated. Kalen woke to find his Omega abilities spiraling out of control, his empathic senses wide open and drowning in the emotional resonance of everyone in the compound. He stumbled from his bed, his body burning with fever and his mind reeling from the onslaught of foreign emotions. The passion artifact, worn by all participants to enhance the authenticity of their performances, was designed to amplify natural attractions. But for an Omega of Kalen's particular sensitivity, the effect was overwhelming. He made it as far as the garden before collapsing, his knees hitting the soft earth as waves of sensation crashed over him. Every person in the compound seemed to be broadcasting their desires directly into his consciousness. Lust, longing, heartbreak, desperation, all of it flooding through him without filter or control. "Kalen!" Real's voice cut through the chaos, and suddenly the werewolf was there, his presence like a cooling balm against the fever in Kalen's mind. "What's happening? What's wrong?" "Too much," Kalen gasped, his hands clawing at the grass beneath him. "The artifact, it's amplifying everything. I can't shut it out." Real knelt beside him, his wolf senses immediately picking up on the magical distress. "Don't try to fight it," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Let me help you channel it." What followed was the most intimate experience of Kalen's life that didn't involve physical touch. Real's magic wrapped around his, not suppressing the overwhelming sensations but organizing them, giving them structure and flow. The werewolf's presence was like a dam, controlling the flood of emotions and allowing Kalen to process them without being destroyed. Better? Real asked, his golden eyes concerned. Much? Kalen breathed, suddenly aware of how close they were, how Real's scent filled his nostrils and made his omega instincts purr with contentment. How did you know how to do that? Pack magic, Real explained, settling more comfortably beside him. We learned to share emotional burdens, to help each other through overwhelming situations. It's instinctive. I've never felt anything like that, Kalen admitted, his eyes studying Real's face in the moonlight. The way you contained it without suppressing it, the way you made it manageable without taking it away entirely. Is that what you need? Real asked softly. Someone who can help you be stronger without changing who you are? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Kalen found himself leaning closer, drawn by the warmth and stability that Real represented. For 7 years, he'd been managing his abilities alone, fighting to maintain control through sheer force of will. But this felt different, like partnership instead of struggle. What's happening here? Marinos's voice cut through the moment like a blade, and both men turned to see the demon approaching with barely contained fury crackling around him like visible electricity. Kalen had an overload, Real explained, rising to his feet in a fluid motion that spoke of warrior training. I was helping him manage it. By taking advantage of his vulnerability? Mirinos snarled, his violet eyes flashing with demonic fire. By using his omega nature against him? I wasn't taking advantage of anything, Real replied, his own temper beginning to rise. I was providing the kind of support that his abilities require. Support that looks remarkably like seduction. Mirinos shot back, and suddenly the air between them was crackling with hostile magic. Kalen struggled to his feet, his empathic senses still raw from the overload. Stop it, he said, his voice carrying more authority than either man had heard from him before. Both of you, stop treating me like an object to be fought over. Kalen, Mirinos began, but Kalen cut him off with a gesture. No, you don't get to do this. Either of you. His emerald eyes blazed with fury as he looked between them. I'm not some prize to be won or some helpless omega who needs to be protected from his own choices. I'm a person with agency and the right to decide what kind of connections I want in my life. We're not trying to control you, Real said carefully. We're trying to understand what's happening between the three of us. What's happening? Kalen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is that I'm being forced to choose between two different kinds of love, and neither of you seems to care what I actually want. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marinos's hostile magic flickered and died, while Real's posture shifted from defensive to genuinely curious. What do you want? Mirinos asked quietly. Kalen took a deep breath, drawing on the emotional control he'd learned during his years of exile. I want to stop pretending that love is simple. I want to stop acting like there's only one right way to connect with another person. And I want both of you to stop seeing each other as obstacles to overcome. Are you saying? Real began, but trailed off as if he couldn't quite voice the thought. I'm saying that maybe the chronicles were right about alternative arrangements, Kalen replied. Maybe some bonds are meant to involve more than two people. Maybe the reason we all fit together so well is because we're supposed to. The silence that followed was broken by Marinos's bitter laugh. A triangle bond, he said. The kind of arrangement that would scandalize every court in the empire. Good, Kalen said firmly. Let them be scandalized. Let them talk about how the exiled Omega and the disgraced demon and the packless werewolf found something worth fighting for. Let them wonder how three broken people managed to create something whole. Real stepped closer, his golden eyes searching Kalen's face. You're serious about this? About all of us? I'm serious about not limiting love to fit other people's expectations, Kalen replied. I'm serious about building something that works for us, not for the audience or the chronicles or anyone else. And if it doesn't work? Mir Enos asked, his voice carrying 7 years' worth of caution and hurt. If we destroy each other trying to make something impossible work, then we'll have tried, Kalen said simply. And that's more than any of us has been willing to risk in a long time. The kiss that followed was different from any that had come before. It was Real who moved first, his lips finding Kalen's with a gentleness that spoke of deep respect and carefully contained desire. When they parted, it was Mir Enos who stepped forward, his hand threading through Kalen's hair as he claimed his own kiss, this one flavored with desperation and 7 years of longing. This is insane, Mir Enos murmured against Kalen's lips. Probably, Kalen agreed, his arms coming up to pull both men closer. But it's our kind of insane. Chapter 5. Blood Rituals and Soul's Cry. The prophetic canvas ritual was designed to reveal the deepest desires and fears of the participants, using ancient magic to paint their subconscious dreams onto enchanted silk. Kalen stood before the blank canvas, his hands trembling slightly as he held the blood ink brush that would translate his inner visions into visible reality. Remember, the chronicle's voice echoed through the chamber. The canvas responds to your truest self, cannot be deceived or manipulated. What you paint here will be what you most desire or most fear. Kalen closed his eyes, letting his Omega senses guide the brush across the silk. He felt the magic flowing through him, translating emotions and dreams into color and form. When he opened his eyes, he was startled by what he saw. The canvas showed a winding path through a landscape of impossible beauty, mountains that touched the sky, forests that glowed with their own inner light, seas that reflected stars that weren't there. But the path was solitary, marked by a single set of footprints that led toward a horizon that seemed to promise freedom. Independence, he whispered, understanding flooding through him. I painted the dream of being completely free. Beside him, Marinos's canvas told a different story. His painting showed a house filled with warm light, windows that glowed with welcome, and the shadows of figures moving within, a family scene that spoke of belonging and permanence. In the center of the image, barely visible but unmistakably present, was the outline of a cradle. Home, Mir Enos said, his voice tight with emotion. I painted the dream of having a family to protect. The contrast between their visions was stark and painful. Kalen's deep need for independence clashed directly with Marinos's desire for commitment and stability. The magic of the ritual made their incompatibility visible for everyone to see. This is why it wouldn't work, Kalen said, his voice hollow with realization. This is why you were right to leave. I would have felt trapped, and you would have felt rejected. No, Mir Enos said firmly, reaching for Kalen's hand. Look at Real's canvas. The werewolf's painting was the most complex of the three. It showed the same winding path that Kalen had painted, but this version wasn't solitary. 3 sets of footprints marked the way, sometimes walking together, sometimes diverging to explore different routes, but always returning to the shared path. The destination wasn't a fixed home like in Marinos's painting, but a series of way stations, places of rest and connection that could be anywhere. A traveling life, Real said, his voice filled with wonder. Not tied to any one place, but not alone either. The freedom to explore, but with companions who choose to share the journey. Kalen stared at the 3 canvases, seeing how they could fit together. His need for independence, Marinos's desire for family, and Real's vision of partnership that didn't require sacrifice of individual dreams. It could work, he breathed, if we're willing to create something that doesn't fit any traditional model. The audience won't understand, Mir Enos warned. They're expecting a simple love story with a clear resolution. Then let's give them something better, Kalen said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Let's give them a love story that shows there's more than one way to build a life together. That night, the 3 of them gathered in Kalen's quarters to discuss what they'd learned from the ritual. The conversation was awkward at first, all of them uncertain how to navigate the new territory they'd entered. I need to be honest about something, Mir Enos said, his usual composure cracking slightly. When I painted that house, that family scene, I was thinking about both of you. Not just Kaylin, but all three of us. And when I painted the path, Real added, I was imagining what it would be like to have people who chose to walk with me, who weren't bound to me by pack loyalty or duty, but by genuine affection. Kaylin felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight control he'd maintained for so long. I've been terrified of being trapped again, he admitted. 7 years ago, I thought love meant giving up everything I was to become what someone else needed. But what if it doesn't have to be that way? What if love means finding people who help you become more of who you already are? Real suggested. What if it means building something together that's bigger than any of us could create alone? Mir Enos added. The kiss that followed was different from their previous embraces, less desperate, more exploratory. It was Kaylin who initiated it, standing on tiptoe to press his lips to Marinos's, then turning to capture Real's mouth in a kiss that tasted of possibility and hope. I want to try, he said when they broke apart, his voice steady and sure. I want to try building something that doesn't fit anyone's expectations but ours. Even if it's difficult? Mirinos asked. Even if we have to figure out everything from scratch? Even if the whole world thinks we're crazy? Real added. Especially then, Kaylin said, his emerald eyes bright with determination. Let's be crazy together. Chapter 6. The Choice Before the Magical Empire. The final ceremony of the Heart's Weave was designed to be the ultimate test of the participants' commitment to each other. Broadcast live to crystal echoes across the empire, it would determine not only the fate of the couples involved, but their standing in the complex hierarchy of the magical world. Kaylin stood in the center of the great amphitheater, flanked by Mir Enos and Real, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes watching their every move. The living chronicles had arranged themselves in a semicircle before the three men, their obsidian masks reflecting the light of the ceremonial fires. Before the assembled courts and guilds of the empire, the lead chronicle announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. These three souls must make their final choice. Will they bind themselves in eternal commitment, or will they release each other to seek their destinies elsewhere? The crowd held its breath, waiting for the dramatic moment they'd been promised. Kaylin could feel the weight of their expectations, their hunger for a love story that would satisfy their need for vicarious emotion. Traditional wisdom, the chronicle continued, teaches us that love is a bond between two souls, a perfect pairing that creates completion and harmony. But these three have shown us something different, a connection that defies convention and challenges our understanding of what love can be. Kaylin felt Marinos's hand slip into his, then Real's fingers intertwining with his other hand. The contact sent a shock of shared emotion through all three of them. Love? Yes, but also determination and a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with tradition or expectation. The choice is yours, the chronicle said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the amphitheater. Speak your truth before the empire. Kaylin stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. 7 years ago, I was a different person. I believed that love meant finding someone who would complete me, who would fill the empty spaces in my soul and make me whole. I thought that if I could just find the right person, everything would be perfect. The crowd murmured with recognition. This was the kind of romantic sentiment they'd come to hear. But I was wrong, Kaylin continued, his voice growing stronger. Love isn't about completion. It's about growth. It's about finding people who see all of you, the beautiful parts and the broken parts, and choose to stand with you anyway. He turned to look at Mir Enos, his violet eyes soft with understanding. I gave you my heart when I didn't even know who I was. And when you left, I thought that meant I was worthless, that I wasn't enough to fight for. You were always enough, Mir Enos said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. I was the one who wasn't brave enough to fight for what mattered. And you, Kaylin said, turning to Real, you showed me that love doesn't have to be a cage. You showed me that it's possible to support someone without trying to control them, to be strong for someone without making them weak. You showed me that family isn't just about blood or pack bonds, Real replied. You showed me that it's possible to choose your tribe, to build something new from the ruins of what was lost. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't the simple love story they'd expected, but something more complex and real. I choose both of you, Kalen said, his voice ringing with certainty. Not because I can't decide between you, but because I don't want to. I choose the complicated, unconventional, probably impossible love we've built together. I choose the family we've created that doesn't fit any traditional model. And if the world doesn't understand? Mirinos asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. Then the world will have to adapt, Kalen replied. We're not going to limit our love to fit other people's expectations. The silence that followed was broken by unexpected applause. It started with a single person in the audience, then spread like wildfire through the amphitheater. The crowd was on its feet, cheering for the three men who dared to redefine what love could be. Unprecedented, the lead chronicle murmured, and for the first time in the ceremony, he removed his obsidian mask to reveal a face marked by wonder and approval. In all our years of recording Destiny, we have never seen a bond like this. 3 souls, 3 different castes, choosing to create something entirely new. Does that mean we've won? Real asked, his warrior's pragmatism cutting through the emotional moment. It means you've shown us that love is bigger than our categories, the chronicle replied. It means you've proven that the heart recognizes no boundaries but the ones we create for ourselves. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Kalen found himself surrounded by his 2 partners, their arms creating a protective circle around him. The weight of what they'd just done was beginning to settle in. They'd publicly declared their unconventional love before the entire empire. No going back now, Mirinos said, his voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Would you want to? Kalen asked, looking between both men. Never, Real said firmly. This is the most real thing I've ever been part of. Then we figure out the rest as we go, Kalen decided. Together. Chapter 7. The truth revealed. Love is not a show. The revelation came 3 days after the ceremony, when the 3 men had retreated to a private chamber to discuss their future away from the prying eyes of the crowd. They were sharing a quiet meal, their conversation meandering through plans and possibilities, when Mirinos suddenly set down his cup with a sharp clink. There's something I need to tell you both, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets. Something about why I really came back to the Heart's Weave. Kalen and Real exchanged glances, both sensing the gravity of whatever Mirinos was about to reveal. I told you that I was a coward 7 years ago, Mirinos continued, his violet eyes fixed on the table rather than meeting their gazes. And that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What's the rest of it? Kalen asked gently, his omega senses picking up on the complex mixture of shame and determination radiating from his partner. When I left you at the temple, Mirinos said, finally raising his eyes to meet Kalen's, I didn't just run away. I went searching for something, a relic that was said to have the power to break blood bindings without harming the caster. The confession hit Kalen like a physical blow. You've been looking for a way to break our connection this whole time? No, Mirinos said quickly, reaching across the table to grasp Kalen's hand. I was looking for a way to give you a choice. The blood binding you cast tied your life force to mine without my consent. I wanted to find a way to break it so that if you ever decided to be with me, it would be because you wanted to, not because you were magically compelled. And did you find this relic? Real asked, his warrior's instincts picking up on the implications. Mirinos nodded slowly. It took me 7 years, but yes, I found it. The shard of severance, hidden in the deepest vaults of the Shadow Court. But using it would cost me everything. What do you mean? Kalen asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew. The ritual requires a sacrifice of equal power to the binding being broken, Mirinos explained. Your blood binding is tied to your life force, so breaking it would require me to sacrifice my own magical essence. I would lose my demon abilities, my connection to the Shadow Court, everything that makes me who I am. You would become mortal, Real said, understanding dawning in his golden eyes. Completely mortal, Myrnos confirmed. Just another exile with no special powers or political connections. But I would be free to choose you for who I am, not for what I represent. Kalen stared at him, struggling to process the magnitude of what Myrnos was offering. You would give up your immortality, your magic, your entire identity, just to prove that you're not with me because of a spell? I would give up everything, Myrnos said simply, to prove that you're worth more to me than power or position or magical abilities. I would become human if that's what it took to convince you that my love is real. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Kalen felt tears prick at his eyes as he realized the true depth of Myrnos's commitment. For 7 years, while he'd been nursing his anger and hurt, Myrnos had been searching for a way to give him the freedom to choose. And if I asked you not to? Kalen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If I said that I don't want the binding broken, that I've come to see it not as a prison but as a connection worth preserving? Then I would respect that choice, Myrnos replied. But I needed you to know that the option exists. I needed you to understand that anything between us is because you want it, not because you're magically compelled. You beautiful, stupid man, Kalen said, his voice cracking with emotion. Do you really think that after everything we've been through, after all the ways we've hurt each other and forgiven each other, that I'm with you because of a spell I cast when I was 17? I think, Myrnos said carefully, that you deserve to be absolutely certain of your own feelings. I am certain, Kalen said, rising from his chair and moving to stand before Myrnos. I'm certain that I love you, not because of any magical compulsion, but because you've spent 7 years proving that you're willing to sacrifice everything for my happiness. I'm certain that I want to build a life with you and real, not because fate demands it, but because it's what my heart chooses. The binding stays, Real said, his voice firm with conviction. It's part of who you both are, part of your story. And besides, he added with a slight smile, I find it rather romantic that you're literally connected to each other. It means I'll always know where to find you both. The laughter that followed was tinged with tears, the kind of emotional release that comes when long-held fears are finally put to rest. Kalen found himself pulled into a 3-way embrace, surrounded by the warmth and strength of his chosen family. So what now? He asked, his voice muffled against Myrnos's shoulder. We've declared our love to the Empire. We've resolved the secrets of our past. And we've committed to building something that doesn't fit any traditional model. What comes next? Now we figure out how to live, Real said simply. How to build a life that works for all 3 of us. How to navigate the challenges that come with being different. How to stay connected while still growing as individuals. We'll make mistakes, Myrnos added. We'll have disagreements and misunderstandings and moments when we wonder if we're completely insane. But we'll face them together, Kalen concluded. All 3 of us as a team. As a family, Real corrected. As a family, Kalen agreed, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt truly at peace with his future. Chapter 8. After the show, a new clan, a new path. 1 year after the Hearts Weave ceremony that had captivated the Empire, Kalen stood on the balcony of their traveling home, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The structure was unlike anything anyone had seen before, part wagon, part magical dwelling, designed to be both mobile and comfortable for 3 people who had chosen a life of movement over settlement. The healing was successful, Real announced, emerging from the interior of their home with a satisfied expression. The merchant's daughter will make a full recovery from the curse. And the payment? Myrnos asked, looking up from the alchemical apparatus he'd been tending. Enough to keep us comfortable for the next month, Real replied, plus a standing invitation to return if they ever need our services again. It had been Kalen's idea to establish themselves as a traveling healing triad. His prophetic abilities had evolved beyond simple emotion reading to something that could diagnose spiritual ailments, while Myrnos's alchemical skills had adapted to work without his former demonic powers. Real provided both protection and a grounding presence that helped them work with traumatized clients. 3 more requests came in today, Kalen said, settling into the chair beside Mir Enos. A village dealing with a plague of nightmares, a noble family whose heir is suffering from a bloodline curse, and a pack of werewolves who've lost their ability to shift. Busy season, Mir Enos observed, his tone pleased rather than concerned. Word of our success is spreading. Are you happy? Kalen asked, the question directed at both of his partners. Really happy? Because I know this isn't the life either of you expected when you agreed to this arrangement. Expected? Real laughed, moving to stand behind Kalen's chair, his hands settling on the Omega's shoulders. I stopped expecting anything predictable the moment I met you two. But happy? Yes, I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been. I spent 1,000 years collecting knowledge and artifacts. Mir Enos added, his hand finding Kalen's. But I never understood what any of it was for until I started using it to help people with you. This work, this life we've built, it gives everything meaning. Good, Kalen said, leaning back against Real's warmth while squeezing Marinos's hand. Because I have news that might change our dynamics even more. Both men immediately focused on him, their attention sharp with concern and curiosity. I'm pregnant, Kalen announced, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness. About 2 months along, according to the healer I consulted yesterday. The silence that followed was filled with such intense emotion that Kalen's empathic abilities were overwhelmed. Joy, wonder, protectiveness, and a deep, abiding love crashed over him in waves. How? Real asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. The usual way, Kalen said with a slight smile. Though I suspect the blood binding with Mir Enos created some unusual magical conditions. The healer said she'd never seen anything quite like it. A child? Mir Enos breathed, his violet eyes wide with wonder. Our child. All 3 of ours, Kalen confirmed. The magical signatures are intertwined in ways that suggest all of us contributed to this. Biology was just the starting point. This changes everything, Real said, his hands moving to rest protectively over Kalen's still flat stomach. Our traveling life, our work, our entire future. Does it have to? Kalen asked. There's no rule that says families have to be stationary. Our child could grow up seeing the world, learning from different cultures, understanding that there are many ways to live and love. A child raised by 3 fathers from 3 different castes, Mir Enos said thoughtfully. They'll grow up knowing that love isn't limited by traditional boundaries. They'll never have to choose between parts of themselves, Real added. They'll understand that it's possible to be whole while still being complex. They'll be the future, Kalen said softly. Proof that the world is changing, that love really can transcend any barrier. The conversation that followed was long and detailed, covering everything from practical concerns about childcare while traveling to deeper questions about how to raise a child who would undoubtedly face challenges because of their unique family structure. But underlying all of it was an excitement and determination that spoke to the strength of their bond. I want to teach them about honor and loyalty, Real said as they prepared for bed that night. About the importance of protecting those who can't protect themselves. I want to teach them about knowledge and wisdom, Mir Enos added. About understanding the world and their place in it. And I want to teach them about love, Kalen said, settling between his 2 partners in their shared bed. About choosing your family and your path. About being true to yourself even when it's difficult. They'll be extraordinary, Real said with quiet confidence. They'll be ours, Mir Enos corrected. They'll be loved, Kalen concluded. More than any child has ever been loved. As they settled into sleep, Kalen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a bitter exile pretending to love for the entertainment of others. Now he was part of a family that had chosen each other completely, about to bring a new life into the world that would grow up knowing that love had no limits. The Hearts Weave had been intended as a show, a performance for the masses. But what they'd found was something far more valuable, a love that was real, complex, and strong enough to build a future on. We pretended to love for the world, Kalen whispered into the darkness, his voice carrying the weight of perfect contentment. Now we're learning to be real, just for ourselves. And for our child, Mir Enos added softly. And for everyone who comes after, Real concluded. We're proving that there are more ways to love than the world ever imagined. In the distance, the crystal echoes carried the sounds of other lives, other loves, other families finding their own paths through the complexity of existence. But here, in their traveling home, three men who had once been broken by the world's expectations had created something entirely new. They had found love that transcended every boundary, built a family that defied every convention, and were about to bring a new generation into the world that would grow up knowing that anything was possible when hearts chose each other freely. It was the kind of love story that would be told for generations, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth fighting for. Not because it followed the rules, but because it proved that the best love stories write their own rules. And in the quiet of their traveling home, surrounded by the people who had chosen him and the life they were building together, Kalen finally understood what prophetic love really meant. It wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding people who helped you become more of who you already were. It was about choosing love every day, despite the risks and challenges. It was about building something that had never existed before and trusting that it would be strong enough to last. It was about three men who had learned that the heart recognizes no boundaries but the ones we create for ourselves, and who had decided to live without limitations. Their love story was just beginning. Epilogue, the legacy. 5 years after the heart's weave that changed everything, Kalen stood in the market square of a small frontier town. His daughter balanced on his hip while he negotiated with a merchant for supplies. Luna was 4 years old now, with Marinos's violet eyes, Real's golden hair, and Kalen's gift for reading emotions. She was a beautiful child, but more than that, she was happy, secure in the knowledge that she was loved by three fathers who had chosen each other as surely as they had chosen her. "Papa," she said, tugging on Kalen's shirt. "Why is that lady staring at us?" Kalen followed her gaze to where a middle-aged woman stood watching them with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. He recognized the look. It was the same one they encountered in many towns, from people who couldn't understand their family structure. "Because we're different," he explained patiently, the same way he'd explained it dozens of times before. "And some people don't understand that different can be good." "But we're happy," Luna said with 4-year-old logic. "Why does that make them sad?" "Because they've been taught that there's only one way to be happy," Kalen replied. "They don't know that there are many ways to build a family." "That's silly," Luna decided, and Kalen couldn't help but smile at her certainty. "Yes, it is," he agreed. "But hopefully, when they see how happy we are, they'll start to understand." The merchant, who had been listening to their conversation, smiled warmly. "Your daughter is wise," he said, "and brave. The world needs more families like yours." "Thank you," Kalen said, meaning it. For every person who disapproved of their arrangement, there were others who saw it as proof that love could triumph over convention. As they walked back to their wagon, Luna chattered about the things she'd seen in the market, her young mind cataloging the diversity of the world with the same open acceptance that her fathers had tried to model for her. She spoke 3 languages fluently, could identify magical signatures by scent, and had never once questioned whether it was normal to have 3 fathers who loved each other. "How did it go?" Real asked as they approached the wagon, looking up from the harness he was adjusting. "Successfully," Kalen reported. "We're fully supplied for the next leg of the journey." Luna charmed the merchant into giving us a discount on the medicinal herbs. "I told him about the sick horses we helped last month," Luna announced proudly. "He said we're heroes." "You are heroes," Mir Enos said, emerging from the wagon with a scroll in his hands. "Speaking of which, we have a new request. A message came while you were gone." Kalen set Luna down so she could run to Real, who scooped her up and spun her around in the way that always made her giggle. "What kind of request?" "A werewolf pack in the Northern Territories," Mir Enos explained. "They're dealing with a curse that's preventing their young from properly bonding with their mates. The symptoms sound like a variation of the binding disruption we dealt with last year." "That's a long journey," Kalen observed. Are you sure you want to take Luna so far from civilization? I want to see the Northern Territories, Luna announced from her perch in Real's arms. I want to see snow and ice and maybe some of those big white bears you told me about. And we'll need to pass through the capital, Real added. We could visit the archives. Let Luna see where some of her father's story is recorded. The Heartsweave had been documented extensively, their story preserved in the living chronicles as an example of how love could evolve beyond traditional boundaries. Luna was too young to understand the full implications, but she knew that her family was famous for choosing each other in defiance of convention. All right, Kalen decided, but we take the safe routes, and we make sure we have adequate supplies for winter travel. Of course, Mirino said, his tone suggesting that he'd already begun planning their route. I estimate 6 weeks of travel, 2 weeks for the healing work, and another 6 weeks back. We could be home by spring. Home was a flexible concept for them. They maintained a base in the southern valleys, a comfortable house where they could rest between journeys, and where Luna could have stability when she needed it. But their real home was wherever the three of them were together. As they prepared to leave the town, Kalen found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. They'd traveled thousands of miles, helped hundreds of people, and built a reputation as healers who could resolve the most complex magical ailments. But more than that, they'd proved that love could exist in forms the world had never imagined. Are you happy? He asked his partners. The same question he'd posed years before, but with a different resonance now. Every day, Real replied without hesitation. Even the difficult days, even the days when nothing goes right, I'm happy because I'm facing them with you. I never understood what happiness meant before, Mirinos added. I thought it was about achievement or power or recognition. But it's about this, it's about having people who know all of you and choose to stay. And it's about giving our daughter a world where she never has to choose between parts of herself, Kalen said, watching Luna play with a butterfly that had landed on her hand. She'll never have to pretend to be less than she is, Real agreed. She'll never have to limit her love to fit other people's expectations, Mirinos concluded. As their wagon rolled out of town, beginning another journey to help another family in need, Kalen felt the profound satisfaction that came from living a life aligned with his deepest values. They were no longer performing love for an audience. They were living it openly and honestly, in all its complicated, beautiful, imperfect reality. The blood binding still connected him to Mirinos, but it no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a choice, renewed every day, strengthened by the addition of Real's steady presence and Luna's innocent joy. They were a family that had never existed before, writing their own rules and creating their own traditions. They were proof that love could transcend any boundary, overcome any obstacle, and build something lasting from the most unlikely materials. And as the wagon carried them toward their next adventure, Kalen knew that their story was far from over. They would continue to travel, to heal, to love, and to show the world that there were as many ways to build a family as there were stars in the sky. Their love story had begun as a performance, but it had become something far more valuable, a testament to the power of choice, the strength of commitment, and the endless possibilities that opened up when hearts refused to be limited by convention. In the end, that was the most powerful magic of all, the magic of love that chose itself, freely and completely, every single day. They pretended to love for the world. Now they were learning to be real, just for themselves, just for each other, just for the future they were building one choice at a time. It was the kind of love story that would echo through generations, inspiring others to believe that anything was possible when hearts chose each other without reservation. And in the wagon that carried them toward their next adventure, 3 men and their daughter proved that the most powerful magic in any world was the magic of love that refused to be contained by anyone else's expectations. Their story continued, as all the best love stories do, not with an ending, but with a beginning that stretched endlessly into the future, full of possibility and hope and the kind of love that changed the world simply by existing. The Heartsweave had been a show, but what they'd built from it was real, lasting, and beautiful beyond measure. And their love story was just getting started.